The knock at the door came from a stranger, a rideshare driver, following instructions from an app, holding out his phone to confirm the address. In his hand was a small, padded envelope. Inside it was nearly all the cash the man answering the door had been able to pull from his bank that morning. The driver had no idea what he was carrying. Neither really did the man handing it over. He believed he was saving his grandson. To understand how he got to that doorstep, we have to go back a few hours, to a phone call that started like any other. This case involved more than 400 victims across the country, according to federal prosecutors, with an average age of 84. To tell it as one story, we're following a representative victim we'll call Frank. He isn't a specific person named in court records. He stands in for the elderly victims described in the government's case, and what happened to him happened to real people across the country. Frank was 83, living alone in a house he and his late wife had owned for decades. He was sharp the kind of person who still did his own taxes, still read the newspaper front to back. He wasn't the type most people picture when they think of a scam victim. But none of that mattered much the moment his phone rang, and a voice on the other end sounded exactly like his grandson, upset, talking fast, saying he'd been in a car accident. The voice said he was scared, embarrassed, asked Frank please not to tell his parents, yet he'd handle that himself once things were sorted out. Then the call cut off, or seemed to, and a second man came on the line introducing himself as an attorney. He explained calmly and professionally that Frank's grandson was fine, but there'd been some damage, possibly another driver involved, and that a certain amount of money would need to be posted to sort out the immediate, legal situation. He gave Frank a figure. He told him it needed to happen quickly before the court day ended. Frank didn't have time to think it through, and that was, in a real sense, the entire design of the call. He went to his bank. He withdrew what he could, and when the attorney explained that a courier would come by to collect the cash safer and faster than wiring it, he said Frank packed it into an envelope and waited for the knock. Here's the part worth slowing down on, because it's the actual mechanism behind this entire operation, and it's more deliberate than it might first appear. According to federal prosecutors, the call center behind schemes like this one operated with defined roles, almost like a sales floor. An employee known internally as the opener made first contact, playing the panicked grandchild. Once the victim was hooked emotionally, a second employee, the closer, took over, playing the calm, official voice of authority, a lawyer, a bail clerk, someone with the solution to a problem that had just been manufactured minutes earlier. The emotional spike came first. The reassuring professional came second. That sequence isn't an accident. Fear on its own makes people freeze. Fear followed quickly by someone offering a clear, immediate fix is what actually gets people moving. Investigators say employees at these call centers worked from prepared scripts, and some locations even kept a running tally of each employee's daily take, treating fraud calls the way any sales floor tracks a quota. The other deliberate piece was speed. Every part of the call was built to prevent Frank from doing the one thing that would have unraveled it in about 30 seconds, hanging up and calling his grandson directly, or asking a neighbor to check in with the family. Isolation didn't require anyone to physically separate Frank from his relatives. A convincing voice and a ticking clock did that on its own. Frank paid the courier that afternoon, but according to prosecutors, this rarely ended with one payment. Often the same call center would call back sometimes the next day, sometimes within hours, with a new complication. A mix-up with the paperwork. A second party in the accident, injured worse than first thought. In some cases, callers claimed a pregnant woman involved in the crash had lost her baby, and that additional funds were urgently needed. Each new call reopened the same fear that had worked the first time and asked for more. Investigators say the couriers themselves were often just as unaware as the victims. Rideshare drivers, booked through ordinary ride requests, were sent to collect packages without knowing what was inside or why. In some cases, drivers were even asked to take elderly victims to their own bank so they could withdraw more cash in person. From the outside, nothing about any single interaction looked criminal. A driver picking up a package, an elderly man making a bank withdrawal, an app-based ride request, indistinguishable from 1,000 others that day. It was only when investigators mapped hundreds of these transactions together, the same runners circling the same neighborhoods, the same cash moving toward the same handful of transfer points, that the pattern became visible. In some cases, prosecutors say, victims were instructed to mail packages of cash directly to specified addresses through the postal service or commercial carriers, cutting the rideshare drivers out of the process entirely. Either way, the destination was the same: a network of runners in the United States who deposited the cash or handed it off in person, converting hundreds of individual scam calls into an organized, repeatable pipeline of money moving toward the Dominican Republic. According to federal prosecutors, the money collected from victims across the country moved through a network of runners in the United States, who deposited cash and funneled it toward money launderers, who then moved it out of the country to the Dominican Republic. There, prosecutors say, a man named Oscar Manuel Castanas Garcia ran the call center operation at the center of it all, employing English-speaking staff and managers to keep the calls and the money flowing. In total, prosecutors say the operation took more than $5 million from victims across the country, including at least 50 in Massachusetts alone. The case took years to unwind. A federal grand jury indicted the group in May 2024. Several defendants were arrested in the Dominican Republic in August 2025 and extradited to face charges in Boston. 13 people in total were charged with conspiracy to commit mail and wire fraud and money laundering conspiracy. By the summer of 2026, the case had started reaching resolution. Castanas Garcia pleaded guilty, along with 3 co-defendants. Another defendant, Luis German Santos Burgos, who prosecutors say ran a separate call center coordinating with Castanas Garcia, was sentenced to 48 months in federal prison. Several others remain at large. There are a few things worth taking from this case. The first is that urgency is the entire mechanism. Legitimate emergencies rarely require secrecy or immediate cash. When someone insists on both, that combination itself is the warning sign, regardless of how convincing the voice on the phone sounds. The second is that a familiar voice isn't proof of identity. A caller who sounds like a family member, especially when you're already frightened, can be extremely convincing without actually being who they claim to be. The third is that repeat requests are part of the design, not a sign something went wrong with an otherwise real emergency. If a crisis keeps needing more money, that pattern itself is evidence. If you or someone you love could be a target, a few habits make a real difference. Agree on a family code word in advance, something only real family members would know, to use in any call involving money or an emergency. If you get a call like this, hang up and contact the family member directly at a number you already have, not one the caller provides. Never hand cash to a courier, driver, or stranger sent to your door, no matter how official the story sounds. And treat any request to keep the situation secret from other relatives as a red flag by itself, since scammers rely on that secrecy to prevent anyone from checking the story. Frank, like the real victims this story is built from, wasn't confused or careless. He was a grandfather who heard his family in trouble and did what any of us would do, moved fast, asked questions later. That instinct is not a flaw. It's love, functioning exactly the way it's supposed to. The people who built this scheme didn't outsmart their victims. They simply figured out how to aim that instinct against the people who had it. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.